Yes, sir. This is the call that you made to me earlier.
Yes, ma'am.
There's a couple questions I need to ask you. This situation is just really drawn out to me, and I'm having a hard time getting any remedy from the situation. My car has been impounded for 45 days now, and even though I have left several messages about getting it released, no one returned my call until after I had a conversation with Sergeant Bullock earlier today. Basically, I am being told that in order to get my vehicle released, that I have to make contract for registration, which at this point it's just been so frustrating. I am willing to put in a temporary contract of registration in order to get my property back. But my problem now lies in getting that temporary registration. I just got off the phone with the Department of Motor Vehicles, and they are basically telling me that I cannot get a temporary registration on this car due to the fact that it's been claimed abandoned. And in order to get the and then I'm being told on the other side, which is the towing company and the 30-day impound department of the police, that in order to get the release signed so the towing company will release it, I have to show them registration and insurance. Now, the car's has always been insured. Okay, that is the only contract that I keep on the car. But as far as getting the registration, my hands are tied, because until it's released from the abandonment status, I cannot get the temporary registration in order to move it. So that is, I guess we'll say, problem number one.
Okay. What's problem number two?
Problem number two, I did leave you a very erratic message, and I do apologize for that, over the weekend. Every time that I leave my home, and mind you, I haven't had my car. I've been riding my 10-year-old son's bike to get us water and food. Every time I leave my house, my neighborhood, I am accosted by officers. Now, they are basically, to me, they're harassing me. They are not literally following me, sir, but they are round the block following me, round 2 blocks following me, round 3 blocks following me on my walk to and from my local gas station, which is the closest place that I can get food and water for my children. And this has been a continuing event, an ongoing event since the original arrest. And it's gotten me to the point where, I'm beginning to fear what could happen to me. I don't know exactly which car is doing it. I do know that when it happens, 9 times out of 10, Officer John Long is on duty, who was the officer that stopped me original on the 22nd. But still, there's like my original tickets nothing in my paperwork pretty much has Officer Long's name on it as being the officer who stopped me and the officer that arrested me. So, I have a serious concern about, first off, why that information from the original stopping officer is nowhere on my complaint, and why there's another officer who was the backup officer listed on that complaint who didn't do anything but assist in that stop. And why is it that I continually am being followed by somebody? I can't even really claim that it is John Long because I have no evidence to back that up. But
Are these people stopping you and talking to you, or
no? They're just giving me awkward looks and hovering. A couple weeks ago, one of them did, give me some head nod gestures of whatever. He thought it was funny that my arm was slinged up, and I do believe that was Officer Long. He had a really good chuckle about my injuries, and I was then assuming that if it wasn't John Long, that John Long let him know that this is the girl that he injured. And so, it's just really odd to me how every time I leave my house, I feel as if I'm being followed by these officers. It's very uncomfortable. It unnerves my children, and it unnerves me. It makes me feel very, very uncomfortable and threatened that that this is still going on. Sergeant Bullock is telling me in his own way that he's known these officers for years, and these officers wouldn't lie. And I'm explaining to him that I have the facts of their lies right here in front of me, and that is that the officer that stopped me wrote the tickets and added charges after I was already in the jail, and then disappeared. Never signed. He didn't sign my tickets. He actually signed the backup officers. He signed the backup officer's name to my tickets. Also, with the file, the audio, which was put into the record, it was supposed to be audio of Officer Penny, but it was not audio of Officer Penny. It was chopped up audio of my conversation with Officer Long. So there's just so many inconsistencies that to me it looks like, Officer Long has been lying, about what really happened that day, and Officer Penny is evidently covering for Officer Long. And, when I have documents that have two completely different signatures on them and two completely different forms of handwriting, I know for a fact that Officer Penny, the only document that he filled out and signed is the tow slip. But the original complaints were filled out in my presence by Officer Long. I was also transported from the scene to the jail by Officer Long, but the information that I'm getting from the prosecutor has basically taken and switched the officer's information, and I don't understand why that has happened. So there's a lot of concern on my part of misconduct that is just not making any sense. I know 1,000% who stopped me, because he had his Velcro patch with his name on it on his vest when he stopped me. And when I asked him for, his 3 forms of identification to allow me to feel comfortable with knowing that I was talking to a law enforcement officer, he refused all that. And then for him to create a situation where his name is no longer attached to anything, and the fact that he has literally forged another officer's name onto the original complaint, I'm not understanding how the case is even able to be adjudicated at this time.
Right.
These
things were mentioned to me when I was briefed today by Sergeant Bullock about the internal investigation of which you are involved with, and he mentioned concerns about that. I've not read the final document with the investigation, but he's closing up, coming near to the end of the investigation itself. It sounds like there may be some issues that we have to correct, and I'm not sure without reading them what they might be, but that was defined to me as being some questions that he had as the investigator.
Okay. All right. Well, as far as the situation with my car, like I said, my hands are tied. I'm willing to engage in this short-term contract of registration in order to get my car back, at least in my presence at my home at least. But in order to do that, I cannot do that until the abandonment is taken off of the car. And the towing company said that, it's not them who have the abandonment for the MDV, that it's Avondale, the 30-day impound. But they're telling me that I have to come with this registration knowing that there's no way for me to even get the temporary registration that they're requiring me to get. So is there any way that you can help me through that situation? Because, like I said, it's been 45 days. It's going to cost me another $700 due to the towing company holding the vehicle even to get it released, and another $150, which honestly, sir, I haven't been able to do any type of work for 45 days. I'm injured. And I'm indigent at this time because of the acts of these officers. So how is it that even if I were to have $800, $900, which is more than the value of my car, even if I had that to give to you guys, I still am unable to get the temporary registration in order to present it to you guys in order to get it released. So it just seems like blockades were being thrown at me at every step that is going to cause me to lose my private property. And I had faith that when I called you guys and got this claim in and the investigation in, that it would be considered at least, to make it as easy as possible and to not to create any additional burdens on behalf of a person who has been working with you guys to expose this corruption pretty much. But for me to initially to have to come up with $800 or $900 just to get my private property back in a case that it shouldn't have been taken in the first place. And then even if I was able to come up with that money, the fact that it's still being deemed as abandoned and there's no way for me to bring the registration to you guys to show you here. I got what you asked me to. Now please release my vehicle. There's absolutely. Did you
ever have your car registered in Arizona?
I went through the process of getting a temporary registration on the vehicle. That was back in 2012. And given the circumstances that I was put under in order to get it fully registered, it had come to my knowledge that there was another process that I needed to do with the judicial system.
You're kind of cutting out with the phone call. I'm not sure what's happening.
I'm sorry. I have a fan. It's blowing this way. That's probably what it is. Is that a little better?
Yes.
Okay. It came to my attention that there was another process that could be taken with within the judicial system that would allow me to assert my rights to be able to travel. And once I was privy to that information, I felt it would be better for me and my family to go the route of asserting my rights within the judicial system rather than being forced to pay extra fees that I may not be able to continue to pay. So I went ahead and I filed everything in the justice system as the process required me to do, and that was to send in my affidavits to give a chance for them to be rebutted, to let them know what tag I would be traveling under, and attach my fee schedule to that, along with my writ to travel. And I've done all those steps, and that was initially right after I got the car. And they have been in there ever since. And, subsequently, because some officers don't understand the contractual nature of their job, I had been pulled over because they didn't understand that I had what is known as a private tag on my vehicle. It states clearly that it's private property and whatnot. And at the time of each of these encounters, I was always very polite. I do my best to be as polite as possible when I know that, an officer may not understand what it is that's going on with me. So I will always give them notice. And, I've given several officers notice, and they would actually take the time to read it and understand, and then even go so much as to call a superior to ask them, hey, what is this? Is there a way for you to look it up, or whatever the case may be? And they have done that on several times, and have given me my paperwork back and have sent me on my way. But when it came to this incident, this officer wasn't even willing to read it. He was not willing to accept me invoking my rights. I even went so far as try to conditionally accept the fact that he wanted to see some form of identification, and I let him know, that I have no problem with showing you my ID, but the fact still remains that I need probable cause that I'm in the process of committing a crime. And it seemed like once I said that to him, he got violent. And I know that for an officer to physically open up my door is an assault on my person. And I let him know that. And I let him know that, from the time he stopped me, that my fee schedule was enforced, and he accepted that. And, that I did not consent to any search or seizure and whatnot. And still, they face planted me, put me in the back of a car. Then they rummaged through my pocketbook, took the ID that they needed to write the ticket. Then they wrote the ticket and hauled me off to jail. And as far as I know, that's not the process that is supposed to be taken in a situation like mine.
Right, Ms. Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
How much of this has been discussed with the internal affairs supervisor?
I've tried to give him every bit of information that I possibly could. I've sent him my affidavits. I've sent him my fee schedule and my writ to travel. I've sent him the pictures that are in the judicial system stating and showing what my private tag looks like. I've also sent him a copy of the Wayne Stump letter just to familiarize him that, that the state Senate understands that there are people that have rescinded all contracts, and subsequently they may be driving without license, registration, or any other type of contract that would deal with that situation. And just to kind of educate him that I understand that he may not know, but it's still lawful and it's still correct, and that I have done everything to make that known to every agency that may come across my car. But now I see that I have to go back into that record, and I'm going to have to get copies of those files and send them out to the different police departments and send them out to the MDV, because for some reason what the process that I have done is being overlooked somewhere. Because if this officer basically didn't want to read what I gave him, didn't want to understand that it is very lawful what I'm doing, and then took it upon himself to damage me and steal my property in the process.
It sounds to me like you've taken your perspective and interpretation of the law, which is different than what we enforce here in Arizona State in the police department.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have registration, you have to have a driver's license, you have to have insurance to drive a vehicle here in the state of Arizona. That's required of every driver. And if you don't have those things, we can only give you back your car when it's been lawfully seized because you're driving without a license. Then, and then I was told you were stopped because of a cracked windshield.
Yes, sir.
Was your windshield cracked?
It does have a very small crack in the front, yes, sir.
Okay. That's
I really don't even know how he was able to see it from, his location. But I do understand that you guys do have codes and statutes that you enforce. But I've been searching and I've been asking, And you know, maybe you can even help me and point me in the direction, because I'm having such a hard time finding any facts of evidence that the code even applies to me. And see, that was one of the...
My question would be, why would it not apply to you, and why would it apply to me?
Well, I understand that you know, that a lot of people are under the belief, but see, you know, that is what I was trying to figure out is if somebody could show me the facts that the code applies to me, then I'll register, I'll get the license back and all of that. But I keep coming to a point where the only answer that I'm getting from anybody is, well, the code applies because the code says so. And that right there is kind of circular logic to me, you know, that I should be able to ask for the evidence that the code applies to me, and somebody from the prosecuting attorney or somebody should be able to give me that documentation or the evidence that they base their presumption on, that the code actually does apply to me. And,
well,
you know, go ahead.
It's contained within Title 28 of our state statute that governs traffic law. And everything you've mentioned so far that's been cited of you has been a violation of that 28 code.
Okay,
so
but...
it's contained within there. You can look there up on the internet and you can read through the manuals. It's rather extensive, but I'm sure what you're looking for is contained within that document. Yeah,
I've actually read that document probably about 60 times within this past 45 days, and what I don't understand is how can the code show me anywhere that the code is actually applicable to me? You see, I needed something from Arizona Constitution or maybe the Constitution of the United States that will be able to show me that this code applies to me. I can't just assume. I mean, I used to assume that it applied to me, but without being able to find that factual evidence that it applies to me, it's now leading me to believe, and it's just a belief. You know, I would love some fact to back it up, but there's nothing that I've been able to find or that anyone has been able to show me or tell me except to lead me back to the code. And it seems, like I said, quite circular that when I'm asking for facts that the code applies, that I'm always being referred back to the code.
Right. Well, the code summarizes the law in Arizona, which requires those things. The driver's license, you have to be able to take a test to show you can be proficient in our state laws when it comes to interpretation and driving safely, and that's a requirement of the law. You have to be a certain age, and you have to meet that requirement, which I'm assuming you've done in the past.
In the past.
If you don't have a driver's license right now, then there's no way to identify you as a lawful driver in our state, then that's a violation. You have to have a driver's license. Same with the vehicle. It has to be registered to, if you live in our state and you work in our state, it's covered in the details of the state code that summarizes the law that we enforce here in Arizona. Requires you to be the registered owner of the vehicle. Same thing with your insurance. It sounds like you do have insurance.
I've always had insurance. That's the only contract that I agreed to.
Okay, you comply with one of the three then, in order for you to be able to get your car back from the tow company that enforces the law, and just simply tow the vehicle at our request when the law enforcement officer went out there and found out you had a license that didn't exist, and therefore you had no registration of the vehicle. I'm assuming that's why the vehicle was towed. But I have not read the entire internal investigation. That's my assumption.
Okay, I understand that.
Based on our conversation. Based on our conversation.
So is there any way that you may be able to have someone look into finding me? Because I know that if it's the application, if what I'm trying to find out is you know, the evidence that it can be applied to me, then I'm assuming that somewhere in the Constitution of Arizona and the Constitution of the United States that it will state somewhere in one of those documents that says that the code applies to me or anybody else because of this reason. And I would be more than happy to accept that. I mean, I I don't want any more hardship than I already have, and but for me to go forward with an assumption that is claiming that something is applicable to me, but then never having the evidence to back up what those assumptions were based off of, it's kind of hard for me to logically make that decision. You know, and like I said, I'm not trying to make anybody's job any harder than it already is. And, you know, I understand you guys have a very stressful and strenuous job, but it still remains that out of 4 or 5 individuals that I've spoken with, the prosecutor included, no one is willing to give me the facts. And yet the prosecutor, without facts, is still willing to prosecute me. And, you know, to me, that seems like overkill. How can you prosecute a case if there are no evidential facts?
Right.
And
do I have that information that took my fingertips? No. It can be found, I'm sure, if there's research that's done and we review the statute and the state constitution together. Mm-hmm. Those are all things that are taught to us in the basic police academy. Mm-hmm. And if necessary, we can retrieve those. Right now, my main concern is, did the officer stop you with just cause? Was there a reason for them to stop you? And did they use force that was appropriate for the circumstance? And I don't know the answer to that question until I get the investigation done.
Right.
That's the most important thing, is to make sure that we're not using excessive force. Mm-hmm. We're using all the force necessary to effect an arrest, and was the arrest lawful and proper? That's what my main concerns are.
Okay.
And then if we have got your vehicle and it's not been impounded properly, then we need to return the vehicle. However, what I've been briefed about so far, there was justification for the stop, which was the broken windshield. And then you don't have a driver's license, and that is a requirement to drive in our city, and there's no registration of the vehicle. That's why your vehicle was seized, because it was not lawfully on the roadway.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Now, if okay, and I really hope that you guys are going to be able to figure this out, but if the investigator came to the conclusion that the original officer that stopped me was not the officer that is on the public record as being the officer that stopped me, then how would this situation be looked upon? Because I know who stopped me, and I know who showed up 15 minutes after we were having a conversation about my rights, who showed up and then what they did. And if what I'm getting from the prosecutor is completely different from what went down that day, then how could it be a lawful stop? You see what I'm saying? Because I know who stopped me, and are you saying that one of the other officers maybe transposed his name on behalf of the other officer at the scene for the paperwork's sake? What I'm saying is that Officer John Long basically entrapped me from the Circle K off of Buckeye. He waved me around him. First he came and sat behind my car, okay, while I was in the store. Okay, I guess he was looking at my private tag. Okay, then he pulled up to where the exit is, and he sat there. So when I backed out of my space, I was sitting behind him waiting for him to go down the street, to which he didn't. He rolled his window down, and he waved me past him. So I went ahead past him, and I continued home. As I got to the traffic light, he pops up behind me. As I make my turn to go down 107th, he got behind me. As I made my left turn into my neighborhood where I live, he turned on the lights. So the fact that he was parked up behind my car beforehand leads me to believe that he was already planning on pulling me over. Okay? And then once Officer Long pulled me over, He came to the window and he asked me for license and registration. I asked him where was his hat. Oh, we don't have to wear a hat in Arizona, to which I know is not necessarily true.
So at true, that, by the way, I do not require that as a chief of police that you have to wear a hat outside your car. That was true in some departments maybe 30 years ago, but it's not true now.
Okay, that's
just for your information.
Okay.
That's the department policy.
But at that point, I asked him for 3 forms of identification, to identify himself, and he told me all of my information will be on your ticket. And I'm saying, you've just approached my window. There's been nothing said about me being ticketed. You're telling me you pulled me over for a windshield. So why is it not forthcoming for you to give me this information? It's not ridiculous information that I asked him for. I asked him to identify himself, and he refused. It'll be on your ticket. Then after I was snatched out of the car, after that, I guess he called for backup. But right. Before William Penny made it to the scene, Officer Long physically opened up my door, and then he stood between the door and my car. Okay, and now, is that not considered an assault? I mean, he could have asked me to step out of the vehicle, but he didn't. He physically opened my door, and then he stood there to barricade himself between me and the door and waited for his backup to arrive. So when William Penny arrived, my door was already open, and I didn't open it. And then, as soon as Officer Penny approached the car, I'm taken from a sitting position, to a good 5 feet away from my car, face planted into the street. He never gave me any probable cause that I was committing a crime. And that's basically the burden that he has. He has to believe that I am committing a crime in order to do what he did to me.
You have to have probable cause to believe you're in violation of a crime, yes, ma'am.
Yes, and see, I don't see that cracked windshield as being a crime. It may be,
That in of itself is not a crime that merits an arrest. However, if your license is suspended or does not exist, and
but see,
I'm
sir,
not sure what are the details are involved with the investigation. What's happening is that you're going through me the same conversation you're having with the internal affairs investigator. We're rehashing the same piece of information that you want to convey to me, to the internal affairs investigator. It's a waste of our time, no offense. But I haven't got this much time to spend with every complaint we deal with every single day.
I do understand.
That's all it would do. And I'm not trying to be rude, just trying to explain to you how the process works. And the person who was hired to do internal affairs complaints investigations is designed to do just that. And review the facts and make a recommendation to me, and I'll make the final decision through the chain of command, and we'll resolve your issue.
Okay. So as far as what's going on with me not being able to get registration, is there anything that we can do that would allow me to be able to at least get a hold of my property? Because, like I said, even if I did have the $150 to pay off for the release, they're still not going to accept it because I don't have the registration. But until
I will find out. I believe that you have to get your registration and your driver's license to get your vehicle returned.
Well,
officers, way for the people that seized your vehicle to get payment for the vehicles that they've towed, because they can't just simply be in the business of taking cars and not having some leverage to get what they're owed to them in terms of the funds. So let me look at that, and I'll have that conveyed to you from Sergeant Bullock.
Okay, I would really, really appreciate that, because like I said, I'm trying to get it back as soon as possible. And, if they could straighten out that step for me, or maybe even if he can look into me filing something for the indigency, because I may not be able to come up at least with, if I can come up with the $700 or $800 to get my car out, then I may not even have the money. If I could come up with the second half, I'm not going to have the money for the first half. So, if there's anything that can be done in order to help me through this situation, I would more than appreciate it, because I understand you guys are still investigating, but I also still have the hope that you guys will see what really went down that day, and then I guess.
As you know, that's under review right now. They'll come to me for that process. That's going to be looked at, and we'll see if we did anything wrong. And I've just raised some things I've got questions about. For example, signing off documentation that's not really in your right as an officer, probably to save somebody else some time, is not the right way to do business. It should be signed by the person who issues you the citation, issues you the documents, issues you the form, etc.
Yes,
but
sir.
These are all things I'm just speculating right now.
Right.
I'm going to find out, and then we'll deal with that issue and correct those as they come up.
Okay, and then if by chance
as far as your vehicle, we'll do what we can, and I'll advise Sergeant Bullock to give you information back. And I really have to go right now. I have another meeting to get to.
Okay, awesome.
And we'll do just that. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for your generous time.
Okay.
I do appreciate it. Bye-bye.